Hi, good evening. My name is Nii Ayikwei Parkes, and I am very privileged to be the writer in residence this year. I decided to dress up a little so that it would hide my disappointment at not being with you in person, because I figured if you could see how sad I was, you might be sad too. And then rather than having a gala evening, we'd all be crying. So I'm going to be speaking around the theme of the language of the voiceless. So it'll be a combination of kind of talking and reading. I don't really like to make notes. Write speeches. I make notes, but I don't like to write speeches because I like the speech to be free. So it might be a little haphazard, but I'm sure I'll say some things that are interesting, or at least I hope so. And I will certainly be sharing a bit of prose, a bit of poetry, and using elements of work to discuss what's important. The reason I chose language of the voiceless is because the word voiceless has always fascinated me, because I feel like it's a smokescreen of a word. When we say voiceless, or at least when the people who made the language, the English people, say voiceless, what I feel they're referring to is the ignored, the things that are overlooked, because it is not that people are voiceless, because does voiceless mean, is silence voicelessness? I don't think silence is voicelessness. Silence can make a point. But if people are ignored, that silence can be voicelessness. So initially, I'm going to be reading from my novel, Tale of the Bluebird, which I think uses silences a lot to illustrate how silence is not voicelessness. I've often been asked why it's such a short book. And I usually say it would be a worse book if it was longer, because I think that the reader's imagination is a really huge part of how a story is received. And if we forget that, sometimes we can destroy the possibilities of the story by filling it with noise. The role of omission in narrative is often overlooked, but omission, that silence, is why I love poetry and short stories. And it's why you notice people get more attached to poems than novels often, or short stories. And so the bits I'm going to be reading from the beginning. It's not really, I'm not selecting bits. I'm just going to read for a while so you can get a taste of the language use in it, because also responding to the notion of voicelessness is the idea of languages that don't get to come to the forefront of global conversations around stories, around memory, around creating new ways of describing the things that are happening and changing in the world. And if we don't put our languages forward, we contribute to a kind of voicelessness. We contribute to an erasure or a lack of recording of knowledge that we might use, or our descendants might use, to anchor themselves or make sense of the world or grow pride from. So, the lack of elaboration in parts of the novel, juxtaposed with the extra detail you get in the investigation, is what gives the novel a kind of tension. Derek Walcott says in his essays, I can't even remember the name of the book, but he says tension creates memory. And I think that's really, really, really true. And I think that applies in this case. So I'm going to be reading. And then, I will be talking about language and stuff. But initially, let's get into a spirit of reading. And we're reading from Tale of the Bluebird. And the first day is Nchi Kwesida. The birds have never stopped singing. If you look, you will see that whatever happens, the birds will sing their song. In my grandfather's time, the forest was thick, and higher. We didn't have to go far to kill a hog. The sport began at the edge of the village, and the taste of boar meat was like water to us. We ate so much. I remember well. Now they have gone deep, the boar. But all things are in Onyame's wide hands. Only Onyame, the shining one, knows why a goat shit is so beautiful. We are not complaining. When I go to forest, I can see that the world is wonderful. The birds are all colors, red, sea blue, yellow, some like leaves, some white like fresh calico. What creatures can you not find there? The smallest cat I've ever brought home is a danko. Danko are not hard to catch. Even when they hide, their ears stick up so you can see them. If I created them, I would have put their eyes on their pointed ears to keep them safe. But then I wouldn't be able to catch them. Maybe hunger would consume me. In danko, they are fast, but I have many traps. That is a hunter's life. So we are not complaining. The village is good. We are close to the chief's village and we can take any matters to him. But we have just 12 families, so we have no trouble. Apart from Kofiata. He's my relative, but before I learned how to wear cloth, my mother told me that he would bring heavy matters to us. I remember my father had brought Otri, antelope, the night before, and she was cooking a benkwine. Yaopoku, she said, when you are playing with your relative, look well, oh. Yo. Yaopoku. My mother said things to me twice. I said, look well when you play with Kofiata. You hear? Yo. She took my hand and put hot soup in it for me to taste. Then she said, you don't know that the woman who helped his mother lost his umbilical cord, eh? She shook her head. It is not buried. The boy will bring trouble someday. So maybe I shouldn't be surprised. But I forgot. We don't think of these things. They are like light. In the day, there's always light, and we don't think about it. But I, Yaopoku, am a hunter, so light surprises me. I'm used to the dimness of forests, the way light falls on me like incisions from a knife when I move. When I go to forest, sound is brighter than light, so light surprises me. The same way I was surprised even though my mother warned me to look well. Be careful. We were at our somewhere when they came. First, it was the young woman whose eyes could not rest. Since you are here, let me tell you. The ancestors say that the truth is short, but Sebi, when the tale is bad, even the truth stretches like a toad run over by a car on those new roads they are building. I, the one who crouches, the one who watches, I, Yaopoku, who has roamed the forest from Atewa to Kade, seen every duika, hog, cobra, and leopard that turns this our earth. I was surprised. But let me tell you the tale before it goes cold. It was my grandfather Opoku, the one whose hands were never empty, who told me that the tale the English man calls history is mostly lies written in fine dye. This is no such tale. It is said that the wise weaver of webs, Anansi, did not sell speech. So I shall speak. I shall tell the tale. It was Kwesida, Inchi Kwesi, just 1 week before Kru Kwesi, when it would be taboo Sebi to speak of death and funerals. Nawatri, before we were to pour libation for the ones on the other side. I'm sure of the day, but if you think I'm lying, you can check with the Bono, who have kept the days for their Santihine for centuries. We were at our somewhere when she came, the one whose eyes would not lie still. I myself was coming from the palm wine tapper's hat. The woman who sells palm wine doesn't open on Kwesida. She went to live in the big city, Accra, for 6 years. And when she came back, she refused to work on Sundays. Before she went to the city, she used to sell tomatoes at the roadside, but that's another story. The palm wine tapper gave me a large calabash of his special. And I was going back to my hut when I heard the woman scream like a grass cutter in a trap. I don't play with my palm wine. No. So I went to put it in the corner of my hut. Then I came to the trembois tree in the village center. She was wearing these short skirts on, showing her thighs, but her legs were like a baby Otri's front two legs. Thin. It was later I found she was some minister's girlfriend. This world is full of wonders. Her driver was wearing khaki up and down like a Kolo man, and he wanted to hold her still, but the woman was shaking her head and screaming. And there she strengthened herself and ran towards a pale car at the roadside. The driver followed her rear like dust. When I asked the children, Oforiwa, Kusi, and the twins, Penny and Kakra, who were playing in the village center, what happened, they said the cream Benz parked and the woman was following a blue-headed bird. It's true that our village has many wonderful things. When she held her nose, she called her driver and they sniffed the air like dogs until they got to Kofiata's hut. They said, "Ago," but nobody answered. Then the driver raised the kete and held it up, and the woman went inside. That's when she screamed. It was still morning, and the sound made the forest go quiet. But it's what happened after they left that's wondrous. It is true. Even the eagle has not seen everything. The sun was at its highest, sitting hard in the middle of the sky. I was resting on the felled palm by the Trinidad tree, listening to my radio. These days, I catch this new Sunrise FM from Koforidua, drinking some of my palm wine and watching the children play when they came. The first car came towards the tree at top speed and screeched to a stop, raising sand like rice husks. There were two Iburuburu in the trees. I'm telling you, they flew off, making that sound like pouring water in their throats and flapping wildly as the other cars stopped near the first. It was 5 cars in all, police cars. The first car wasn't even like the police cars you see sometimes. It was a Pinsgoa with a long aerial on top. That's how I knew it was a big matter. Pinsgoas are what the army use when they are going into jungle for training. I've seen them while hunting. The big man in mufti got down from the Pinsgoa. He was wearing a big black abomu over his jeans and he was eating groundnuts. Who is in charge here? The children pointed towards the giant kapok tree beyond Asari's farm. The chief lives in that village there. The other policemen had come down from their cars, all in black. Policemen 1119 in our village on this young day. The one in mufti looked left and right. Then I saw him looking behind the tree at my mother's blue sanya basin that I put on top of my hut after she died. I remember she carried water with it until it was full of holes. Then she took it to a farm to harvest vegetables until there was just a big hole at the bottom. I put it on top of the grass on my roof so I can see my house from far when I'm coming back from forest. When the policeman looked, I looked too. And there he looked at me and pointed. "You, do you speak English?" I thought, this man either doesn't respect, or because Sebi, I have shaved my hair, he can't see my 74 years, chewing groundnuts while speaking to me. I didn't want to say anything. I raised my calabash and drank some of Kweku Usu's palm wine. It was good. Kweku Usu is the best tapper in the 16 villages under our chief, and the 12 villages under Nana Afari. "You," the policeman walked towards me, while the children jumped around him. Oforiwa started singing a Papa Police song. That girl is always singing and clapping. Kusi was standing by the 8 policemen in uniform, touching their guns while they tried to push him away. These policemen, they carry guns all the time, everywhere. Even I, a hunter, I put my long gun down on Kusi's dad. "His name is Openyipoku," said the twins. "Ah," said the policeman, "senior man." He showed his mother's training and swallowed his groundnuts and put his hands behind him. "Openyipoku, please, do you speak English?" I smiled and finished my palm wine. Small, I'll go for Nkuma adult education. "Okay, listen, I no get plenty time. I dey house for a crowd where I get call say some woman find something for here where it is smell. You know something for the matter?" Hey, the elders say that news is as restless as a bird. But as for this, the woman had come in the morning and it was still morning. Afternoon had not yet come, but these policemen were here all the way from Tafo, all the way from Accra, as if there were no policemen in Tafo. I shook my head. You see the woman? Oh yes, police, I see her. Thin woman like so. The policeman smiled. But you know they smell anything? No, I know they smell anything. He turned to look at the other policemen. Do you people smell anything? Yes, Sergeant. It stinks like rotten meat. Thank you. He turned to me again. And you know they smell anything? No, Sergeant. He shook his head. So where the woman go? Accra. No, which side she go for here? He raised his arm towards the Trinidad tree. I pointed at Kofiata's hut. The other policemen followed him. After a little distance, he stopped and turned to me. Openipoku, I beg, make you come some. I called Kusi to come and get my calabash and radio, put them at the door of my house, and tell Mama Aku that I'll be back later. Then I stood up and walked to join the policemen. The Sergeant was trying to send the other children back, but they were still singing and refused to leave. He looked at me. Children, I said, stop your silliness and go home. They stopped following the policemen and turned to leave. Suddenly, the Sergeant clapped. Children, do you smell anything? No, sir, Sergeant. They laughed and ran off. The Sergeant frowned and looked at me. Openipoku, why say we all they smell something where you people for here no they smell anything? I laughed. Sergeant, make I talk something for tree inside. Oh, Openi, no problem. Then listen, Sergeant. Sebi, our village is like a vagina. Those on the inside have no problems with it. Those on the outside think it stinks. So, Tale of the Bluebird, this entire section is written in Openipoku's voice, in a transliteration of Tree, which is one of the languages from Ghana. A combination of that, and when he's speaking to the police, he's speaking Pidgin. But if you open the book, every time English is spoken, it's in italics. And that was a way of switching voicelessness, because one of the things that's normalized when we grow up in an Anglophone tradition is that foreign words, this being French initially, Spanish, you know, those words that fashionable Anglophone novelists would put in their words to show that they traveled, would be put in italics. And then as those of us from the global South started to write, our words would be put in italics, sometimes with a glossary in the back, or even an explanation right after the word, as though it's supposed to be part of the story. Now, what that does is it makes our own people voiceless in the consumption, to my mind, of our own work. Because it says to my people who would understand when they read that this book is not for you, because I'm explaining something you know already. So it's either the book is not for you, or I'm saying that you are not intelligent, you don't know yourself. And so for me, that was a huge influence in choosing to italicize the words and phrases that would have originated from English, and keeping as normalized the transliteration of tree. One of the initial things that happened in editing was the editors did not understand what was happening and tried to get me to just change everything back. And I had to explain the politics of it. So the point being that in order to not be ignored, because as I said, voicelessness is not about silence. It's about not paying attention to or not making space for. So in order for us to not be ignored, to not be voiceless, as the world would like to structure it, sometimes we have to fight battles that other people would not need to fight. And so the question then becomes, in how many ways does silence speak, or can silence speak? And our silence can be dissent, which is why silence is not voicelessness. It can be taking a position. It can be a way of seeking social justice. And so the notion that voicelessness is to do with utterance is, I think, something that personally, I'd move away from. So my task then, or at least one of the preoccupations of mine as a writer, is to reduce the number of the voiceless in the world, which is to say, to make their stories present and relevant. There's a way in which silence speaks very eloquently. And there's a way in which our actions have to give propulsion to those silences, or to those quests to reduce our voicelessness. So for people who have a different language, or write in different ways, have reconfigured the English language to suit them, often the question I get asked is, if I want to get published, should I change it? And that is a path that some people may take. I think the cost of that path is a kind of voicelessness for the people you originate from. Because if you don't make visible the voice in which you communicate and commune and grow, it may disappear, because there's nobody to see how it's being used. The generations after will have seen us come and recreate in somebody's image, and they will start to form themselves in that image. For me, one of the emotional drivers for my approach, and why I've been willing to take this risk, I don't even think it's a risk, is to take this, let's call it a percentage of contemporary invisibility. The reason I've been prepared to do that is because I think in the long term, it helps to preserve a voice that otherwise would not be present. This is why I really value the voices of everyone in the Global South, particularly the Black diaspora, because our voices, we have been practicing voicelessness because not being voiceless put us at risk. So we all have dual personalities. We have the personality that protects us, which is why we can switch between registers. The reason why we develop in every corner of the world where we've gone, we develop creoles or patois, or as I like to call them, augmented Englishes, is because we know that if we speak everything that we think, we subject ourselves to harm. So how do we bamboozle those that seek to oppress us? We add some remixing to the language. We make it a safe space for us. But that then can translate into a global voicelessness, even while we have ample voice and celebration amongst our small coteries of self. And so I encourage anyone from any of those diasporas to have the courage to express themselves, to not be voiceless, because it's essential that the texture of the world going forward includes the threads of our histories and narratives. So recently, one of the things I'm doing is also writing for younger ages, because voicelessness is also about not seeing certain representations. So it goes beyond language. I did a book of retellings of African stories from around the continent for children. And as I was doing it, I was thinking about all the books that I had read, and also the books that I had read to my own children. And I was trying to think of spaces in which the way that they are is described as something desirable or of beauty. And so when I rewrote these stories, I augmented them. I made them bigger, I made them larger, I gave them detail. And I subtly put within them affirmations, so to speak, which reduce the voicelessness of our existence. So, for instance, I'm going to read a little. I hope you don't mind that I'm reading children's stuff to you. I mean, so this is from a Madagascan story called The Rebirth of Adrianbahawaka. Now, the Madagascans have very long names. One of the first things that happened in editing for this collection was I was sent an email to say, hey, can you make these names shorter? Because it might be confusing for readers. Or if you can't make them shorter, can you explain why the names are so long? So I wrote an email back to the editor and I said, if you're going to allow me in other stories to explain why names like John are so short, then I'll very happily explain why names like Adrianbahawaka are so long. And I don't think I got any, let's say, objection to the long names after that. Anyway, I'm reading from a section here, and it's really about, in this story, a bird gives birth to a human child because the bird had a human lover. So yeah, it's just about this birth. And what's significant here is how the baby is described when the baby arrives. But obviously I have to give you a little bit of a way into it. So I begin here. There was a woman from the village who could sit on the egg for Ivrombe. She was one of 4 maidens on the island who had not been married to King Adrianbahawaka. Oh, this is what the book looks like. Tales from Africa. And I use a pen name for that, to pay homage to my father, but also to avoid confusion, because my adult books really should not be read by children. Yeah, anyway. Who had not been married to King Adrianbahawaka before. This was because she was short and the king's lemur eyes could not look down, so he had never noticed her. Her name was Angoria. The Bipo knew her because she had been kind to him once when he was injured near the village. She was skilled at counting backwards, balancing, wrestling, weaving, climbing, catapult shooting, and running. Her ability in climbing and balancing made her a perfect caretaker for Ivrombe's egg, as the mother bird's nest was high up on the largest ebony tree for miles. As soon as Angoria arrived in the forest with the Bipo, she tied her hair into 5 tufts on top of her head, climbed to the top of the tree, and took over from Ivrombe. While Angoria was on the egg, Ivrombe fed her 2 other chicks and flew them over to her land. When after 4 days the egg still hadn't hatched, Angoria began to feed on the ebony tree's jackalberry fruits, which were sweet and filling. On the 7th day, while talking to the Bipo, Angoria heard a crack. You're probably wondering what a Bipo is. So I've already said that the bird's giving birth to a human child that's going to come out of an egg. The entire island was full of hybrid things. So they had croc-hoppers, which were crocodiles and grasshoppers, snails with the red blood of a lion, snails, that kind of thing. And then the creatures that stayed on one land were called one-landers. And those who lived on many, like birds do, are called birdlanders, right? So that's how it goes. And so the Bipo is a cross between a bee and a hoopoi, which is a kind of fancy bird. You should Google it. Anyway, so That's why there's a beeple. She shifted off the egg a little and saw a clear zigzag line in the shell. The beeple hovered excitedly, flapping his wings faster and faster. There was a second crack, then a cry. Angoria lifted her head and the beeple slowed his wings down because the cry sounded like a human cry. The maiden crawled away from the egg, stood in the nest, and watched as a human baby girl, the darkest, most beautiful, chubby baby girl, emerged from the egg. Now, the first time I went into a class and I read this and I said, the darkest, most beautiful, chubby baby girl. And this was a class with a good percentage of, Black kids in it. I could see their faces light up because I don't think they'd ever heard read from a book for children that a dark baby was beautiful. If a baby was described as beautiful, they probably didn't describe the features. And every child normally assumes that that baby is a bunny baby with curly gold curls or whatever, I don't know what color, and blue eyes, right? And it was just incredible. And at that moment, I decided I would write a lot more for children. But one of the other reasons for writing for children is also just to make sure like these long names, these other ways of seeing the world are documented. Because otherwise voicelessness ensues. Even in the way that things are perceived. This book has in the back of it some notes about Africa. I don't know, you probably can't see. Anyway, these were compiled by a team at the publishers. And I don't know why, but I asked to see them before it went to print. And as soon as I saw them, I asked my agent to write to them and tell them, I'm not going to allow them to release the book unless I can edit these notes. Because in amongst the editing of those notes, in amongst those notes was the idea that Africa had a problem with the extinction of species and needed help to preserve these species. Now, it may be true that there are species that are on the brink of going extinct, that are endangered on the continent of Africa in different countries. This is true. However, to say that Africa needs help without explaining how come these animals are endangered creates, for any child that reads those notes, a savior mentality. They say, I'm going to go and help the Africans. Now, I don't want some English child or some French child reading that and thinking I'm going to help the Africans without knowing that actually it was their ancestors that went to Africa and were so stunned by the things that they saw that they started trophy hunting, killing these beasts, taking their heads and hanging them on their walls in their drawing rooms all around Europe. And then beyond that, when they started to do commercial agriculture, what did they do? They destroyed the habitats of these animals so that they could grow roses and wheat and stuff like that. And that also kills species. This is why there was a problem, or there is a problem with endangerment. The quagga, or wagga, whatever it was called at the time, which was kind of half zebra, half horse type creature that roamed in eastern South Africa, was extinct very soon after Europeans encountered it, because they'd never seen anything like it. They'd never seen anything like it. That would never have happened with the Africans, to use the collective term, because a lot of the original traditions respect nature and take care to restore things or to take a break from hunting, all of those things. In the Benin Kingdom, they used to harvest palm nuts and make palm oil. And they'd been doing it for centuries. There was no problem. After the British sacked the Benin Kingdom on the premise that some Englishmen had died, but really, if you read the notes that they went with, they were going to rob the king of Benin because he had gold and ivory, and they wanted to get their hands on it. And they were broke from fighting other wars. And so that was the actual motivation that was written. But after they destroyed the kingdom and the Oba, who's the king of Benin, had escaped and he was no longer around, and later was captured and exiled, within, I think, a decade, there was risk of running out of palm trees. This is something that the Benin Kingdom had been doing for centuries. The British got there. Within a decade or two, there's a crisis. Now, if we don't tell these stories, the story that is told is one of a place that's deforested, a place that has endangered species. And there's no responsibility given to the people who actually brought the damage. And that is a kind of voicelessness. So the language of the voiceless is actually presence. That's one of the languages of the voiceless, is presence. So presence is one of the languages. One of the other languages of the voiceless is dignity. We can only express our dignity if we speak. And not necessarily by using words, but by being present and not being silenced. And when I say silence, not being ignored. One of the things, the gifts that language gives, or that a language can give, is it can tell the philosophy of a people. If you look at all the creoles and patois that have been developed, when you look at them and the words that they've developed within them, they reveal philosophy. They reveal people who have a philosophy of how to construct meaning. One of my favorite words in my language, Ga, is lamlu, which is, in fact, is usually said twice, lamlu, lamlu. Now, again, if you look at the repetition of things twice, of words twice, it's something that exists in many African languages. And if you look at all the creoles and patois in the Caribbean and elsewhere, where Black people have settled, you will notice that that pattern exists. It tells you that there's a philosophy. So we tend not to say very, we say the same thing twice to emphasize, or more times. So that tells you that the philosophy doesn't go away. Something is there that remains. That is part of the voice. But anyway, coming back to lamlu. Lamlu, the word for gray, is made of two parts. La, which is fire. Mlu, which is dust. Fire, dust. So the word for gray comes out of living and experience. Basically, you burn a fire. What's left after is ashes. The color of those ashes is the name of the color, the dust of fire. That is beautiful philosophy. Now, if you don't have that language, it doesn't tell you that these are people who are thinking about these things and reflecting. The tree word for heart is akoma. If you break it down, it's akoko, which is chest, ma, full chest, heart, right? Again, if we don't speak these things, nobody knows, it becomes an invisibility, a voicelessness. So the language of the voiceless is also retaining our dignity, understanding that everything that we have comes from something. The way in which we dismiss our traditional beliefs very quickly. I mean, look, the church has done a great job. I'm not saying that the Bible and religion, whatever religion, they're not valuable for giving people purpose and direction and a code for life. But we can't also let them destroy a heritage. So there is that voicelessness as well. So these are all the levels on which I look at the idea of voicelessness. And one of the things I feel is very important is to share those things. Because for me, I can't imagine, and I hope this is the truth for everyone, I can't imagine that the voices that made me laugh, that founded my experiences of the world, should disappear. So if that voice is my grandmother speaking to me in Ga, why should I let Ga disappear? If that language is my great uncle telling me stories in Patois, right? Why should I let that sound disappear? Why should I not preserve it when it gave me so much? Why should I not preserve it and pass it on? So the language of the voiceless is also the language of all the ancestors. So we go back to the African belief that we are products of our ancestors and we are still connected to our ancestors. And that is part of our language. So I am in the process, and I'm committed to documenting stories that are untold as part of a way to reduce voicelessness in the world. But it's not a project that one man does, because we have so many stories. I always say this, we have so many stories. Africa and its diaspora have so many stories, and beautiful stories and restorative stories, and stories that are not just of struggle and survival, but joy. We know how to laugh. When I meet with my friends and my family and we laugh, it is an explosion. When we're in Babylonian spaces in the West and we laugh, people look as though something dramatic is happening, like there's an earthquake, but it's just joy. And somehow that formula, that chemical formula that allows us to experience that degree of joy and express it, not everybody has. So that laughter will be part of our resistance of voicelessness. I'm reading now from my poems, The Gaze. Again, in the spirit of speaking the stories that are unspoken, as a constituent part of resisting voicelessness. The language of the voiceless is partly memory. This is 11 page to Nii Ayikwei for Kakeku and Ma Rainey. Signs. Blood of mine. It is said, it was an uncle said someone has to stay behind to receive the letters, to tell the story, though not at leave to read. But we both know that's a Brez ruse, a cousin saving con. You stayed to flatten yourself into signposts pointing away from where we fled to. Brown as tree bark, expression wooden, you burned. Loath to give me up, you flamed as my wings bent. I became wind, you became smoke. I see your signature before it rains. I pour libation for your sacrifice. Your children sprinkle 40s for my disappearance. I should say Kakeku was a folk singer in Ghana and Ma Rainey in the United States. And Nii Ayikwei means good brother. And so this story is really about the relationship between the diaspora and Africa. Also bearing in mind that there are some of us that were in the diaspora and managed to make it back to Africa, either through escape or rebellion or resistance, so it's that story. And so for those of us who made it back, of which my family constitutes one, we also have to remember that the people who stayed behind contributed to us being able to leave. because nobody leaves a flock of sheep to go looking for one. So if you're able to escape, it's because also the person who was going to come looking for you didn't want to let go of the ones that they could still see. So we are each other's keepers and have always been, even if we're not aware of it. So that was one sign, one science. Two, lizards. It was old Tom Wilson said later, Anyemi, safer among the alligators. The swamp's embrace making a mist of my tracks, shape-shifting my glaze into scales. It was a measure of my fever that I fled, one white man to fight alongside another, held loyal for a cold, hard promise. It's the price of the ticket, the cost of return, a will folded as achingly as our bodies when we were tallied and shipped here. When you're ready, Omanfo, when we sit one day to the agreement of two lizards, one orange fleck, the other with an orange band, you'll see. I'll tell you how my veins knew ice to a Nova Scotian degree. 3, passing. One freezing night in a dream, a pair of antlers through shadows as hard as jail bars, cut across a wasteland, blurred my vision. When I awoke, I was unsure if the twin shape stood for us, but there's a proverb I now know, Manyo. Two antelopes do not solely roam for companionship. One eats, the other watches. You didn't flinch at the crossroad in Nanabi. Your genius for metaphor, already clear as mead. You factorized the 3/5 skewed algebra of liberation down to me minus white, you plus white. You chose the plus sign. You would not ghost pass. If phantoms are white, death is free. Your cousin got freedom. I haven't stopped moving since. 4, earth, wind, water. Your totems hum still in the shrines we nested in trees, before ill winds blew white sheets to anchor cargoes of wood and breathing greed of our warm shores. Did we guess, or did we know, to riddle our prayers into the pores of the earth itself? The rivers ciphered slick with warnings. They began with mirrors, changeable as their skins under sun, before they looted masks with empty eyes, hollow songs, stretched goat skins under untutored hands. Dead goats on their own cannot bleat the drum's message. All the earth's miles can't serve a song from your tongue. I see your offspring dance our river's skin. So I'll stop there. So it's an 11-part poem that talks of the way that language goes back and forth and memory has remained and is shared back and forth. And the not often explored story of our separation and our continued connection in spite of separation. I'm going to read now from another poem. It's called Caress. And again, within the service of reducing voicelessness, in telling stories that the world doesn't always hear from us. 1. If I speak often of gardening and days still rise behind the creep of morning sun, it is because somewhere along my thigh lies the memory of a tomato plant's jagged leaf nibbling at my skin at dawn. Your hand steady at my shoulder, your voice gentle in my ear, pointing out tiny buds that will turn to flower, then fruit. I hold the faded watering can, its silver sharp against my grip, dark as yours, as we wade between beds of onion and kale, lettuce both green and red, aubergines that stand high as my chest, and all the while time unfurls. Birds bicker in the guava tree behind us, doors crack open, the light spreads. its luster caressing your tight curls as you pull a radish clean out of the soil. Shake it and bite through its red skin to the crunch of its white flesh, passing one half to me. We speak nothing, Okomfo, of origins, but I know you planted all these seeds and taught me the tender and the harsh, the art of nurturing them. And this is all I needed to know of love, ever. A morning before sun, the beauty of bud, flower, and fruit, a father's voice with bird song, the tart white secrets in a radish's heart. Two, between his first word and his first love, a boy goes to Grecian lengths to undermine his mother. His chores undone, he creeps beyond the horizon of her view, past milk bush and fallen rotten petals from bougainvillea, into the haze of dust raised by a fury of youths playing football. Waits his turn, while idle tongues run loose with tips on how to love a woman, how to dribble from one foot to the other, scoop the ball up with a touch light as a feather and strike. All this before he is first called to play. He drops a word he retains from his escapades on bare fields, by dry grass-choked open drains, in patches of fruit and flower-flecked green, of the kind cities hide like armpit hair. In the air when his mother calls, and the hand she means to place on his unkempt head naturally bears no tenderness. He scrambles to shelter by the mongrel that will soon be struck by lightning, the one whose tongue she despises, waits for her rage to cool. Thus begins the tutelage of a man salvaged from masculinity. And now he remembers the strength of her shoulders, her firm riposte when, because of her short-cropped hair, men dared call her small girl, whistle across the road. Caress of her hand on his neck as she reproved the teacher for caning him for his forthrightness. Her anklet of colored glass beads that never broke. 3. It is easy to be misled when your head lies in the lap of a lover who promises all the things you want your life to be filled with, without so much as a skipped heartbeat. You will learn later that a cricket's vow is not the same as an elephant's, that soft caresses at the pressure point where the ear's flesh meets the skin behind your high cheekbones can shapeshift into something deadly on a whim. But for now, how sweet it is to be loved. You believe it all. You will live in the sun like your grandfather did. Your children will know the thud of avocados and mangoes falling unbidden from trees at dawn. They will speak with your tongue. They will know both your songs. It is easy to forget in those treacle-sweet moments the inflection in your name that signals you have ancestors still old for their hard labor in the split rock and damp of the Americas. How you can't be beholden to the mediocre since your very intestines are echo chambers of dreams swallowed under an umbrella of whips. In the cavern of a kiss, how easily things slide to the back of the mind. Gone, your father's lessons on how to fondle fruit, to tease a tender skin with fingers, to fathom the ephemeral line between ripe and rotten. So you are lost, tumbling in a vortex of broken promises, guilt trips, and misused savings. This is what becomes of your heart just before it breaks and you begin to claw back yourself. Your blood is hybrid, your tongue is mongrel, you carry songs of refuge, refugee mysteries in the loom of maroon shanties that shift language. Your father has been taken, his own father gone, father upon father across borders echo, and the sea waves back. Your skin is weather beaten and it absorbs sun, hatred, fire, and shea butter. It doesn't crack. Summertime and you're still living. Pick up your pieces by the only light that still glows. the fading flower of your mother's smile. 4. My daughter dives clean as a lemongrass blade cut into water, and something in her, some sheen of worry is extinguished as her long arms brush what was still into acceleration. She comes alive, her head bobbing in and out between breaths. My mother's shoulders unfurl in her butterfly strokes. My father's limbs contract every time she turns. She is calm, luminous in a way I am not when I swim. I find my release in word and song instead, knowing sometimes the precise tune I crave and what souvenirs it carries. Entire affairs live with me in this way, in gaps between horn solos, the catch in Ella's voice before Satchmo's refrain. One day, my daughter will remember, as I did when she was born, a long buried song that emerges in snippets, swaddled in memory. If you ask me, I could write a book. Inkebobaya, 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 da da. Then a melody too, she has forgotten the words for, but flowers still beneath her lips. A baby cries, its mouth a dark, dried fruit. And from somewhere, your entire inheritance of comfort comes tumbling forth. Heartbeat, caress, the first words that stilled the waters when you entered the world. Careful. 5. Sometimes a man wakes with Spanish phrases in his head with no clear reason beyond a few hours spent in Madrid, Lima, and Buenos Aires. There is no hand on his chest, no man or woman calling from another room to ask what he will have with his coffee, no skin-born memory of caresses, just mala hierba, which is a snippet of something overheard, and hablemos de la sensualidad, which he can only imagine is the fruit of a history of building languages from scraps gathered in the crowds and markets of Accra, Kumasi, Cape Coast, and Manila, Ewe, Twi, Tagalog, Fancy. There may be yet more in the bud of his heritage, with a great-grand from Fernando Po and others retrieved to the mother continent from Guadeloupe, Nova Scotia, Jamaica. Who can ever tell what words he will scream should he wake and find his head replaced by flowers, his eyes stamens, his cheeks a mesh of petals, pollen scattering every time he speaks. So what I was doing in the gaze, which is written like it looks like the G's to somebody who's speaking standard English, but the gaze is also one of the oldest languages in the world, originating from the Ethiopia, Eritrea subregion. And it also sounds like gaze, like to watch. So again, it's playing with what is assumed, what is seen, what is not seen, and countering voicelessness in that way. Beyond the writing of stories and books and sharing of stories and books, I've even I wrote an alphabet book for my language, Ga, the Ga picture alphabet. Again, because I fear that with no action taken, voicelessness will creep and grow over everything we've ever known. And so our language must be visibility. And out of, the collection of stories I wrote, there have been Ladybird books. The idea being that in order for our language, and when I say language, it is not words simply. Our language is our way of existence, the way we emotionally relate, the way we remember, forgive, sing, cry, all of that is language. And if we don't bring that to the fore, and the only way in which, and the ways in which we interact with each other become increasingly mimicry of other people's ways of being, then we are becoming voiceless, even though we still have voice, even though we still have language, because that language will no longer be ours, even though, and again, in the second instance, I mean actual language. So for me, the language of the voiceless is actually the ultimate language of the voiceless is witness. And witnessing is what we do as writers. And this is why we are so dangerous. We are considered dangerous to anybody that is seeking to control a people, a narrative, a future, and access to freedom and happiness. Our language is witness. And so we are the language of the voiceless. And this must be, if you really want to be a writer, to commit to the process of creating beauty out of the mundane, of creating memory out of the ignored, of creating narrative and history from our lived experience, of making our histories prominent and interwoven in the fabric of the world's history, then it is also a commitment to bearing witness. And how do we bear witness if we don't even speak or commune in the languages that raised us? So my plea, my approach, my campaign, my hope, what I believe is important to share with anybody that is on this journey and is feeling a compulsion to be a writer or a storyteller, is not to forget that we chronicle beyond what we imagine. We also chronicle what we've witnessed. And that might be couched within an imaginative frame. We can write science fiction and still be writing about what we go through and some of these traumas and inherited memories that we carry within us, as is so eloquently done by some of our great speculative fiction writers like Octavia Butler. And even when the stories are what we call popular fiction, like the stuff Walter Mosley does, they still bear witness. They bear witness to trauma. They bear witness to the effects of oppression, degradation, disrespect, ignoring people, what it does to the psyche, to what violence it can breed, what pain it can foment. All of those things are expressed in those works. And I feel like by knowing that we are witness, we are also witness regardless of what we're doing, there are levels of complexity that develop within our work that add value to our experience as writers and the experience of readers. So it's not something that is a sacrifice without benefits. It certainly has benefits because it allows us to come somewhere close to complexity of life itself. Because in life itself, nothing is ever as simple as it looks. Waking up is not simply waking up. Waking up is also survival, right? Yes, it's a simple process. You get to open your eyes and it's a new day. But that means that every single process within your body was operated in the night. That by some serendipity, something didn't fall upon your roof. That some flame didn't consume all that you ever were, all the memories you ever had. And when you think of it that way, the value of waking up is an entirely different thing. The urgency to witness becomes an entirely different thing. And I think what makes us writers is our urgency to witness. We are seeing the world as it's described by other people, as it's experienced by other people, and we're seeing something extra or something different. And the compulsion to write is a compulsion to actually express that difference. And it takes us a while to synthesize that compulsion into true motivation, into a coherent way of expressing ourselves and writing and creating a body of work. But that process must start from awareness that we are witness, whether we like it or not. We are cursed by our senses. We might be blind, but we have other senses. We might be deaf, but we'll have other senses. We might not be able to utter words, but we can still express ourselves. And this is why when I say voiceless, it is never silence that I'm speaking of. It is invisibility. And if we use our languages, and this is in the most pluralist sense of it, then we won't be invisible or voiceless. But primarily, remember that the language of the voiceless is witness. And that is what we share as writers. And that is our duty, to use the abstract of language to constantly seek to make as clear as possible what we've witnessed. And this is why it's a life's work, because language is abstract. And so we're constantly trying to find the best way to express. And if we consider that to be the truth, then the wider our palette of languages, the better equipped we are to witness. So we should never be dropping things that have made us. We should be trying to pick up more things. So welcome to the world of witness. And thank you for having me as your writer in residence, for listening. And I hope that this gala evening will have the energy it requires. I am going to go and have a nice drink. I hope that you will too after I have left. And thank you. Remember, you are witness. And that is the language of the voiceless. Thank you.